Hello and welcome to our third edition of Cutting Through the AI Hype in Canada. It's a series dedicated to exploring how artificial intelligence is transforming key business sectors in Canada. My name is Derek Marinos, your host and moderator for today's discussion that will explore how AI is impacting the energy and utility sector. As many of you know, this ecosystem is facing important environmental, economic, and infrastructure challenges. We have a great panel of experts to help us take a closer look at the issues and some of the interesting trends. Let's meet the team. Peter Warren is a vice president at CGI and a global industry lead in the energy and utility space. Peter is based in Ontario and brings more than 30 years of experience with deep enterprise expertise, in business development and industry solutions. Vincent Dufresne is an energy engineer and a policy expert with extensive experience in the energy and utilities industry. He's also an expert in energy efficiency, load management, electrification, and distributed energy resources. Vincent is based here in Quebec. Mark Van Engelen leads emerging technology projects and proofs of concept through to implementation at CGI. He brings 20 years of experience with innovative service delivery and implementation to our conversation. And Andrew Donaher is vice president at CGI. He also leads our AI and analytics practice in Canada, helping clients further their competitive advantage. Andrew is based in British Columbia, where he supports clients nationwide. Welcome to you all.
Derek.
Now, before we get started, a quick note to our audience, and we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a question or a comment for our experts, please do drop one in the chat for us. Well, let's begin the conversation. I think a really good place to start, of course, is with a State of the Union, especially here in the energy and utilities sector. And I'd love to hear from everyone, get your thoughts and opinions. Peter, let's kick it off with you.
Sure. Thanks, Derek. Welcome, everybody. This will be a great time, and thanks again. And please do share your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. Really, the energy industry has been looking at the AI strange for a long time. Machine learning is not new to this group. Really, the change is the whole development of generative AI. That's the thing that's really impacting the industry the most now, as it is across all industries. It's also an industry that has traditionally not changed the way it works because things don't catch fire, they don't blow up if you do them a certain way. This is how we've always done it. So there's a certain amount of hesitancy to jump into generative AI too far, too fast in the industry. They want to see whether their data is up to speed and can they trust it. To steal a line from my friend Mark there is, do they have enough trusted data to do trusted action? And that's across the union right now. I think everybody's really concerned about those things, but they are still moving forward.
Vince.
You know, Derek, I think it's a great time to be in the energy and utility industry right now. I think with the energy transition, with the decarbonization nationwide effort that we're going to have to make, we see really an industry that will change quickly, that will grow quickly. The number that sticks to our mind is the $1 trillion infrastructure investment that'll have to be made. And of course, that's an investment in infrastructure, but there's also energy efficiency, electrification, and demand management to be done with that big investment to be made. And I think AI is very, that hype surrounding AI is very timely, Derek, because it's an industry that will need more resources and need more workforces and will become increasingly complex. So AI comes just at the right time to solve a lot of the challenges that the industry is currently facing. So it's certainly a good conversation we can have today because there's tons of opportunities.
Yeah, thank you, Vincent. And we're going to get into some of those challenges as well and some of the solutions a little later. State of the Union from you, Mark, at this point.
Yeah, I would just add to that, like the timeliness, also from a technology perspective. So a lot of the sector has been going quite hard and heavily on, moving to cloud, setting up data platforms, focusing on some of the technology side of it. So I really see it as it's the right time for some of that IT convergence and that technology convergence now. So the sector is more ready to expand in this area, and really this is an evolution, right? As Peter was saying, they've been working on AI for many years, but there's definitely it's time to accelerate on that evolution.
Interesting. And Andrew, your State of the Union here in terms of what you're seeing.
Yeah,
Appreciate
yeah.
it.
I think the group is. Yeah, I'm aligned with the group in terms of AI is not new, but the generative AI is new, and with the demographic challenges and the investment challenges ahead of us, it's incumbent upon us to use it. And what I personally think is the biggest change, and we'll get into this through the day, is that this is not a hype cycle. This is not your traditional Gartner hype cycle. We're able to deliver results now faster than we ever have. We're able to, the breadth of the things that we're able to do and the manner in which and the speed with which we're able to deliver results now has completely changed. And that's what we're seeing, not just in Canada, but globally, as Peter mentioned, is data is never perfect, but you start today and you go. And we can't use that as a crutch not to realize the value of the benefits that we're going to get in the next little bit.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. We're going to dig in a little deeper a little later on. But Andrew, I'd like to come back to you now and talk a bit about that, because there are some technologies that are out there that are currently being used in the Canadian energy and utility sector as well.
Yeah, as everybody's Vincent and Peter both and Mark said previously, the AI and machine learning has been being used in the energy sector for years. Everything from demand planning to asset maintenance to truck rolls, right? And what organizations are now starting to do, and we're seeing a lot of this, is how we're leveraging generative AI to support everything from predictive asset maintenance and digital triplets all the way through to customer support. Some organizations are having trouble, meeting the regulatory requirements in terms of customer support and getting back to people and answer the phone the right way. Well, we're seeing these things support those. Our position on this is that, responsible AI is here to support the subject matter expert. It's here to help the subject matter expert become more effective. And we're seeing that ubiquitously across the industry right now, everything from asset maintenance to digital triplets, as I said earlier. So there's a lot happening right now. And I actually think it's a pretty fun time to be in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd like to dig a little deeper here. And Mark, if you could provide an example of two of some successful implementations, we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I would say one of the areas is in the intelligent document processing. Kind of the energy utility sector has many documents, think of tens of thousands of manuals or engineering drawings that are stuck, which have a lot of data in there. So leveraging kind of the generative AI as well as more traditional AI to access those documents and being able to automatically, let's say, extract compressor information or line information and line numbers from engineering drawings, checking against their asset management systems, making sure they have inventory for those parts available if there's maintenance scheduled, is a really exciting use case. Intelligent document processing, and it's been around for a while, but now because of GenAI and the access to the technologies, people are starting to take more advantage of that. And we've got some good use cases where you can kind of bridge a knowledge gap by having a chat type of interaction with these documents. You're saying, hey, there's a problem with engine 304. It's making a ticking sound. It actually in the background looks at all those documents and gives you an answer to support, as Andy was saying, support the SME or the expert with some of their decision making on what to do. So that's one interesting example. And the other one is where we've helped companies set up their data platforms properly. Now we've got good quality data, let's say for their electrical submersible pumps or their compressors or some of their IoT sensor data. We pull that together, and now we're able to implement lots of different AI use cases. These are questions that the operations folks have of their data sets that they weren't able to ask before. And now we have that data platform in place, and GenAI, we're able now to interact with their data sets in a much more rapid manner than they were before, when they had to ask somebody to look at get a report, pull the information, lots of back and forth. So that's a really exciting momentum that we're seeing as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And some of those use cases we're going to touch on a little later in the program as well. An important shout out for that too. I'd like to focus a bit now on some of the challenges we do have in the industry. And Vince, I'd like to come to you just to talk a bit about what are those primary challenges of adopting artificial intelligence in the utilities and energy sector.
So, Mark, the utility industry, the electric utility industry, is an industry of 100 years old worth of experience. And it's an industry that's been built on its primary value given to customers is reliability, right? And then the second value given is basically the competitive price that we expect from our utilities, the gas utilities, the electric utilities. We want in Canada our electricity cheap, and we've created utility commissions to ensure and create that regulatory constraint and guardrails to get our utilities to be prudent in their deployment of capital, to be prudent in the use of their operational expenditure budget. And so what we're seeing is an industry that moves fairly slowly towards a goal, like a bowling ball, right? It takes its time to accelerate because it's being prudent, because it needs to engage with its regulatory body and ask permission to deploy capital. So it's an industry that needs to accelerate greatly, but it's taking a bit more time to get there. And it also has all of those considerations of the health and safety of its workers and making sure that nobody dies in the field when performing a maintenance. So that's create a healthy caution vis-a-vis innovation, including but not limited to AI. But it's just a matter of time. Like the need is there. The realization that this is all needed has been gained, and now it's just going to be a matter of reskilling, doing the change management, and really looking into the data sets and look at those use cases and take them to market.
Interesting. Andrew, coming back to you here too as well for a bit of a follow-up from an energy perspective.
Yeah, I think that one of the governing bodies that we follow, or sorry, a summary of the governing bodies that we follow is the IAPP. It's a regulatory tracker globally, and it looks at what's happening here in Canada, Singapore, US, UN, and even the OECD in terms of what they're doing with regulatory tracking. And this is a question we get often from people in various industries. And I think one of the key things around this is that there's a lot of regulatory constraints and proper rules and regulation that currently exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think that there's been, and a lot of organizations are reinforcing their AI usage policies and their regulations to be incumbent upon that. But I think we really need to leverage what's in place and drive that acceleration forward. We're seeing some of the things that Mark talked about, that we're implementing in various jurisdictions. And I think in Canada here, we have a great opportunity to move forward very quickly. Our ability with the skills that we have in the market in Canada and the capabilities that we have, I think it's imperative upon us to move forward quickly. As Vincent said, that the bowling ball needs to turn into a bit of a tennis ball.
Or a baseball at times too, and get down there in a hurry. Peter, what are you hearing from executives regarding data and trust in the space?
Yeah, it's an interesting group. Our Vincent hit on some of this, and so did Andrew and Mark. Is that the executives are saying, I want to move forward, but do I trust what's happening here? So there's a cautiousness. Even some of the analyst firms have done a survey of executives across CIOs and above and CEOs a year or so ago, and said, they're all very nervous about this. What is this going to do? And to Vincent's point, it's a good point. But to Andrew's comment, Canada, I think, is being more cautious than other parts of the world. Other parts of the world have dove into this. Their drivers are different. Certainly the conflict in Europe that's going on with Ukraine, the energy pricing impact there, they've dove into this much faster than we have with the data they have today. It doesn't have to be perfect, to make educated decisions and move along. So there's this sort of, I want to, but should I? And I think Canada is actually a little slower than a lot of other places I see in the world. And it solves the problem that we hear our own surveys do. So when we look at the macro trends from our Voice of the Client surveys that we do, We see that they're concerned about an aging population and workforce. So AI helps to solve that, as Mark was hitting at. They're concerned about improving security and privacy. Well, AI can help you with that. So there's a sort of dichotomy. Should I not? And I think, to Andrew's point, we got to get going.
No, that's a good point. And just a reminder again to our audience, first of all, thank you for attending today's program. And also a reminder that we'd love to hear from you. So if you have a question, please do drop it in the chat. And we'd love to hear from you. And our experts would be happy to answer as well. Continuing with the conversation, we're looking at what we're hearing from executives, but there's also some real environmental, business, and workforce impacts. Andrew touched on some of the regulatory challenges before. Vincent, I'd love to hear from you first on that, and then we'll get to Peter.
It's funny that people think AI, they think workforce impact, they think it's our jobs going to be lost. In the energy industry right now, there's no such question. It's an industry that's going to need more workforce in any case. And it's probably facing shortages and facing lots of people going to retirement and losing of the know-how and the expertise that was built over the past 2 or 3 decades, right? So like really AI comes as a solutions to solve those shortages. Like I think Mark touched all of the engineering that the utilities have to make to rewire the grid, put new pylons, put new poles, put new transformer stations. Because all of that will require more engineering, and we have AI present solutions for that to make those teams of engineers faster and more productive to meet the challenge that we have at hand. So it's not so much of a question of will it create an attrition of jobs. Like if people lose a certain role, they'll be reskilled and attributed to another part of the utilities. Like utilities won't necessarily need to lose any of their current staff. They'll want to retain them. They'll want to attribute them to other positions, other jobs, reskill them. It will have an impact on what people are doing right now. Might not be what they're going to be doing in 10, 20, or 30 years. But if the electricity and energy and gas utilities industry is the sector that one has picked for his or her career, they'll most likely be retained and carry on and then be part of that transformation that we're looking at.
Hey, Derek, can I
go ahead.
compliment what Vincent is saying? So there was a great paper that was done. It's ancient now. The last update was in November of 2023. It's called "Generative AI at Work." For those of you who haven't read it, it's a fantastic paper at MIT. It was one of the first scientifically performed studies in this area, where it was scientifically peer reviewed, and they studied actually use of a call center. And they studied the use of a call center, and it was for a Fortune 500 software company, almost 5,300, 5,267 call center agents globally. And there's obviously they saw the improvement in people using people's productivity. They saw 14% improvement in productivity. But that's not actually the most important thing that's in this study, and a lot of people skip over it. There was 2 things in it. So number one, when we mentioned earlier about the subject matter experts becoming more experts, they had people who were there for 2 months who all of a sudden became as good as people that were there for 6 months, and people that were there at 6 months became as good as people that were there for several months. And so what you saw was the experts didn't increase, but the people that were training became more productive. And that's what we're seeing inside CGI with our own studies, where you're seeing the experts are saving up to 20% of their time because they're not having to answer the questions from the juniors. Now in Canada, we are, for the first time was 2016, we had more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 14. In British Columbia, by 2035, we're going to be short 1 million people in the workforce. Okay, there's going to be 1 million more jobs than there are people available to fill them. Okay, so the reason I'm saying this with respect to sustainability and environmentalism is, yes, There's the carbon side of it around supply chain optimization and around generation optimization, all of that we're doing. But to go back to that study, one of the things that was in that was they actually saw for people using AI had a statistically significant improvement in their engagement at work and their job satisfaction, because it removed the non-value add activity. So from a sustainability perspective, what we're seeing is people are it's actually decreasing the stress in their lives by using these tools. Like we're actually literally seeing, as Mark said earlier, with that work we did using generative AI for people maintaining assets. We went from weeks to repair an asset down to hours, sometimes minutes. Like the knock in the G3700 Caterpillar engine that Mark was talking about, we solved that problem where it was a voltage issue on the battery, solved in 7 minutes. And so this is not just sustainability from a carbon perspective, where it's super important and things like quantum computing can help us, but there's also the sustainability aspect around people's support for their jobs and support for their livelihoods to help remove those non-value add activities that I think everybody's kind of skipping past, honestly, but I think it's one of the most impactful things that it's helping us with, not just in this industry, but in many industries.
No, very good point. And I think, when it comes to productivity, especially in this country, and I know in the province of Quebec, it is an issue. Peter, I did want you to compliment too as well from Vincent, a final note when it comes to, the real impact from an environmental business and workforce perspective. I think you have something you wanted to add there.
Yeah, sure. The environmental aspect, of course, is tracking everything. Can I do things more efficiently? Can I do things at a lower cost? Can I cut out waste? AI can help you with all those things. Building upon what Andrew added and to Vincent's thing about improving employees' lives. Our viewpoint isn't AI is going to automatically do a bunch of things without humans involved. It's as you heard, it's about making humans more efficient, more powerful. It's also about taking away in the workforce unsafe things, confirming things, checking and balancing. We have a use case in a very large client in Europe in this case, and they want basically a digital assistant that sits there and says, when this happens, when this situation goes on, these are the last time it happened, this is what you should do, this is how it should work, here's the 4 or 5 things you should consider. So it's taking that knowledge of all those retiring people and from all the other scanning and stuff that Mark talked about and putting it at your fingertips so you can actually make these decisions. It's also in the case of a Canadian utility, they had a whole bunch of employees. There was one department. This goes back to simple RPA. This doesn't have to be generative AI. They had a whole bunch of people really unhappy with their job because all they were doing is moving paper from left side of the desk to the right side of the desk in a very huge, important project. By automating that, they suddenly had all this stuff go away. And the coaching was these systems, these software robots are not competition. What they're going to do is think of them as an employee that does all the grunt work you don't want to do, all the unpleasant, unnecessary stuff. So you can be efficient, use your brain for what it's really, really good at, and take all this moving the paper and document and sorting stuff, automate it. So it doesn't have to be all Gen AI. It can be very simple things.
Right, and again, with an eye to increasing productivity and improving also quality behind the desk and what's going on, especially for workers and employees. I got a question from the audience. Mark, I'd like to toss this one your way. Abundant GenAI applications in parsing documents, manual specs, and standards. People are talking about having issues understanding engineering drawings, connectivity, schematics, general arrangement. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, we've definitely experienced that as well. So I think, this is where you have to really think through the business problem that you're having and putting the right architecture of solutions together. So GenAI by itself won't do that, but the combination of having an optical character recognition tool, a couple of algorithms that understand, hey, if it's a circle and it has a number in it, then it must be a line number. If it's a triangle, then it must be a compressor number, things like that, right? It needs to understand those type of drawings. And we've had challenges for sure. We've worked with hand-drawn engineering drawings from the 1920s in different languages, or and they had all kinds of other figures that typically don't show up in an electronic version. So having that right set of technology tools like OCR or robotic process automation, Peter was just talking, as well as then preparing the information in such a way that it then can be accessed properly by a GenAI or large language model is key to make sure we do that. And also having the recognition that maybe the 1920s engineering drawings are out of scope for now because I don't have an algorithm that's ready for that yet, or I need to spend some energy training on it, but I only have 10 of those, right? So I'm not going to do that. So making those more tactical decisions, and we see we help clients with that, and we are able to make progress on thousands of engineering drawings that do fit certain criteria, but then there's a couple that we don't process, or we do still process manually in the extent. So it's a good question. We definitely see that, but selecting the right combination of technologies still allows you to solve that problem.
And solving problems is really an important thing for everyday business and everyday life, as we all know. And that steers us in a nice segue to talk about the benefits of AI and the potential benefits, of course, in the energy and utility sector. Let's look at operational efficiency. And Andrew, how does AI contribute to predictive maintenance and energy infrastructure?
So one of the things that we're doing right now, obviously, everybody's doing a lot of work on digital twins. Mark's talked a lot about, using GenAI to help, parse through documents for experts. One of the things that we're actually doing right now is we're evolving the digital twins out into digital triplets. And so one of the problems, as we all know, around asset maintenance, number one, failure events aren't that often. Number two is that the real challenge is if a failure event happens while everything's operating within normal operating parameters. Virtually every asset we have now has alerting on it if it's outside normal operating parameters. The challenge becomes when it's doing that. And so what AI is helping us to be able to do is to widen the data sets and lengthen the amount of time. So one particular organization we were working with, they're having a generator issue. First generator kept failing, couldn't figure it out. Everything looked normal. Second generator, they put in a redundancy. The second generator started failing. Put in a third redundancy. And then finally the client, even they got tired of spending money. And what we were able to do is actually look at the holistic process. And the event didn't happen until 88 hours prior, when there was off-gassing in a particular part of the process that started the chain of events over an 88-hour process. So what AI is helping us to do is to understand that we can get wider and wider and wider data sets to look for these minor inferences. It's no longer, the evolution of the age of the expert to the age of data means that, the expert's guiding us, but it's no longer an expert to tell us that the 5 most statistically significant variables are this, therefore you shall look for this. It's how do we broaden that and let the AI help us, or the machine learning, actually, not AI, but let machine learning help us to look for those related variables. And as we talk about digital triplets, that's one of the things we're evolving to is, as we're creating digital twins of these large assets and large facilities, how do we're starting to leverage generative AI and AI in general over top of that to help us look for various scenarios for failure events. We're also looking for, what are the relationships for things, and can we run, 100,000 scenarios around it to identify what might happen with an asset failure, as opposed to like 15 or 10. So these are the things that we're working through now, where, like we said earlier, it's the breadth and the width of the data that we're able to bring in 10,000 variables to look at, or 15,000 variables to look at a particular event and see what's happening, not just 3 or 4 that the subject matter expert told us about.
Yeah, thank you. Vincent, in what ways can AI optimize energy distribution networks?
When we think about the distribution networks, and I'm thinking here electricity distribution network, these are networks that traditionally didn't need to be that smart. Like, they were taking up electricity distributing them to the retail customers, to houses and businesses, there were very little management around them. Like very few utilities had sophisticated. Some of them did have the distribution management system, outage management system, but they were pretty unsophisticated. Like right now, what we're seeing with customers becoming more sophisticated, having more self-generation solar PV panels on top of their roof, that grid has become increasingly more difficult to manage. So utilities have contemplated implementing new management system, advanced distribution management systems, distributed energy resource management systems. So this is a big investment in infrastructure, and it's really concerning much smaller transition. The bulk market long had an energy management systems backing it and operating it. Now we're talking about much more transactions, smaller transactions that have never justified an investment in technology, let alone someone to operate them. So it will become a necessity to have heavy automatizations and backed by AI to be able to cope with those small, short, more frequent transactions coming from a more decentralized grid, which we need to accomplish the energy transition, right? We know that the utilities are going to become heavily constrained. Demand is going to go up, and now they need to catch up. Will they be able to deploy infrastructure, the bulk market infrastructure or not? So people will start having more of those resiliency systems and start transacting with each other at a decentralized level in microgrid. And then AI will become capital to create new virtual twins of the distribution systems and be able to do those quick, small transactions that are needed to operate those distribution grids. And then that's a very critical consideration right now. Utilities are thinking about this and making investment and trying to consider how will they operate that? How is that is it possible to operate it?
Thank you, Vince. Got a couple more questions from the audience I'd like to get to. Peter, I think I got one for you here. This seems pretty interesting. What are your thoughts on establishing GenAI and challenges related to organization, change management, and culture shifts?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Going back to our own Voice of the Client survey that we did with both clients and even non-clients, it's sort of like what an analyst firm would do. We found out that those that are investing in digital transformation and achieving results, in other words, they said, I'm investing in this and I'm happy with the ROI I'm starting to get, actually were much more agile and nimble with dealing with these things, that they had a better change culture management structure. They were actually able to deal with this. Going back to resistance that Andrew talked about at the beginning in Canada, we're a little bit more hesitant here. I don't know whether it's a Canadian cultural thing. We're not hesitant on the hockey rink, but we're a little hesitant in some of these other things, is that I think we need to jump into this and manage these things, move forward. Because if the data is telling us to turn left and we're definitely wanting to turn right, that's what we always believed. When you have that big wide data set that Andrew was talking about, where you could actually tell the fact that when this vibrates, that's going to go. You have to have the willingness as an organization, therefore some management structural changes and belief that if this comes up, I'm going to validate it to Mark's point earlier, but if I believe it, I'm going to then act on it and move forward. And there's a definite correlation between investment, ROI, and happiness by being more agile and willing to modify.
Another question from the audience. It sounds like the productivity improvement due to AI is another smarter kind of knowledge management system, which makes learning cycles shorter. Is that a correct interpretation, Mark?
Well, there's multiple different productivity improvements. Definitely that we see one of the areas, like we were giving the examples about the document space, is that bridge to becoming more well-versed or more understanding of the assets, etc., is becoming shorter. So, somebody that's an intermediate and has access to these kind of information at their fingertips is leaning more towards senior fairly rapidly because they have access to that knowledge, which otherwise would have taken, a decade out in the field to learn from scratch. So it's one of the ways of productivity improvement is shortening that kind of learning cycle or knowledge gap. But there's definitely other areas of productivity that we see, for example, in the developer space, where some of these tools are proactively building things for you. We see that in other areas as well. And Andy, anything you want to add in that productivity space?
No, I think you hit that, Mark. I think it's really important to note, though, the difference between generative AI and AI, or maybe it's the difference, but the distinction of one is a branch of the other. So a lot of the practical examples using generative AI are now focused around that because it was around the interpretation of text, which we've not actually been able to do really well historically. I mean, sure, NLP was around and NLU was around, but this is a different level. So a lot of those are there. I think that if you look at, as Mark said, about some of the things when we're doing with, one of the large utilities in Canada around enhancing the demand forecasting models, being able to use Vince, I know you've had some work with this particular client, but being able to widen that data set to do that, that's a different game. And then the other one, if we could circle this back really fast, there's an example from the Canadian energy regulator that we can talk about. Maybe we'll talk about that a little later. Some of the things they did around engineering drawings and whatnot, but I think it's really important to distinguish between GenAI and AI in that space and which is being used for what.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew.
Sorry, and we follow our clients, right? Where do they want these productivity gains? Some want it on the customer space. Some are looking at employee productivity in certain teams. So that's really, again, it starts with the business challenge. What do you want to achieve? And then we see if AI or Gen AI is where that would be a good fit to get that productivity gain.
Okay, thank you. Another question from audience, and a heartfelt thank you to our audience for the participation. I think it's wonderful and it's great to see. Vincent, coming to you with this one, and it's about distribution. Are you considering like AI-based solutions as an alternative investment in distribution automation and infrastructure retrofits?
So yes and no. Let me put it that way. AI and along with many other technology solutions will be critical to right size the grid. So making sure that we make investment right in time to meet the demand in avoid outages and avoid overly constrained distribution grid. Does it need that it's going to replace infrastructure replacement? Well, not necessarily. Derek, we're thinking right now between the next 30 years that we're going to need double to triple the amount of electricity that we need in Canada. So it may delay, it may defer some investment. It may maintain resiliency in certain areas of the grid that are overly constrained, and we were short-handed to organize to deploy the capital. We were short-handed to do the engineering design. Maybe we're short-handed to deploy trucks to go and do the construction work that's needed to overhaul the infrastructure. So we'll be able to maintain the resiliency of certain neighborhood, which is highly valuable, using AI-driven solutions and basically optimizing how the grid is being managed to shave off a couple of kilowatt. But the bottom line is we're going to need to deploy that infrastructure. So we'll buy ourselves some time, and we'll also be able to plan ahead and anticipate the demand much more and downturn in the demand too. So the other problem that we want to avoid is overbuild and then basically have stranded asset that all of the constituents, the ratepayers, are going to have to foot the bill for with great impact on their electricity bill. And that's also very important. So there's many use cases that one of them being the load forecasting and the very granular geo-targeted load forecasting that we're going to need looking ahead. And that help right sizing the grid, I think, is the buzzword to keep in mind.
Thank you, Vince. Peter, another question from the audience. I'd like to direct this one to you. How is AI being utilized to strengthen the resilience of energy infrastructure against extreme weather events and cyber threats? And how do AI models incorporate risk management and contingency planning for supply chain disruptions and operational anomalies?
That's a big question. So
is.
there's more than a few key parts in it. So I'll do my best to hit the majority of them. Part of it has to do with what Vincent just talked about, using AI to right size the grid, but also build in redundancy at the same time. So looking at the engineering of the grid, the design of the grid, the failover of the grid. So he really did a good job of hitting that part of it. The other part is, and this actually goes back several years ago, almost up to 10 years ago, before AI was the buzzword that it is today. We were looking at this with clients. So think about the deploying of resources during a storm event. You've got to send people, crews to certain spots, particularly when you have a large geography like we do for utilities in Canada. You've got to have assets staged in the right spot. It's very much like a military exercise. If you're going to go into battle, you actually plan the battle, you do rehearsals of the battle, you may have a digital twin of the battle, then you go into it and work on contingencies. And what we started back then and what we've actually are now in the process of looking at again with the more modern tools is using things like built into a particular piece of our software here, we have a thing called event replay. In other words, the last time this event took place, when a storm came from that direction that looked like this is exactly what took place. These are where the people exactly went. These are the things they actually did. Here's all the spare parts they had to have and so on. So with that kind of data, when you talk about what Andrew did with this big breath, you can actually pre-model that type of event that, again, let's say the hurricane that just came through, if it had picked up, we could go back and say the last time a big hurricane, I think it was Sandy that hit, for example, the East Coast and things like that into Ontario was one that affected where I live. You could now go back and model that and say, I could probably assume something very similar is going to happen, take in the new data that Vincent has, but since that last time I've done these things to my grid, what is the probable cause and effect? So you can actually pre-stage for these types of events and understand what's moving forward. So it really gets into much more almost like you're planning for combat. Where do I stage the troops? Where do I stage the parts? Where do I get my contractors? What do I do? Do I have enough? Do I need to put my suppliers on notification into the supply chain? I'm going to need some of these things. What compatible units do I have? And so on. So that's exactly where we're going with this now.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Moving on to sustainability, and Vincent, I'd like to speak to you for a moment here on this and find out how is AI contributing to the integration of renewable energies?
Yeah, most certainly. So renewable energy, we know has become an imperative because like solar PV and wind power have become basically the cheapest resource and the easiest, fastest resource we can deploy. So as demand grows, we need to meet it with new generation capacities. And we've got those intermittent generations that will be built in most capacity expansion model forecast to meet that demand. Now that is intermittent. So we'll see energy management systems like the grid operators needing more of fine tuning of their grid operation, and then renewable energy in AI will be of help to automate many of the recurring tasks that the grid operators have to do and assist with their daily work as they seek to balance the grid. We were seeing multiple use cases across the globe for this. But I want to also take it from the perspective of the customers. Many of those customers have environment, social, and governance objectives, right? They want to use clean energy rather than fossil fuel fired energy in their operation of their industrial facilities. So increasingly, we'll see those companies using AI to make arbitrage day to day, hour to hour, intra hours, even decisions of when to use electricity coming from the grid, when using electricity coming from own batteries, or using energy from energy thermal storage, and make those quick decisions And if the price signal is right, and if the grid operation is designed rightfully to give the right price signal, they'll end up twinning with wind production. They'll end up twinning with solar electricity productions. So AI will help both on resiliency on the side of those customers who knowing when to use energy from their battery stores, when to use energy from other sources, and at the same time twin with the solar energy productions to reduce their environmental their carbon footprint over time.
Thank you very much, Vince. Peter, can AI help reduce the carbon footprint of energy production? If so, how?
Yeah, actually, we see it even on the customer side. So we've got, of course, people entering into the energy industry, but the green steel industry, I'll talk about that. So the demand for steel around the world is flat, but the demand for green steel is exponential. And so what these companies are looking for, and we see energy companies responding to it, more specifically in Europe, but Canada is getting there too, where they can actually prove that either their electron or the molecule they're selling is greener than their competitors. And so this traceability of saying, I produce this from a green source, or low carbon source, green gets overused, but low carbon source, I can say that this low carbon energy could be hydrogen, could be natural gas, it could be anything that's considered lower carbon. I can prove it to my consumer. Therefore, when they make their quote unquote green steel, that they can actually measure the input to these things. And this gets into the whole supply chain. This gets whole into scope 3 of the ESG model. So scope 1, the thing you make, scope 2, the place you make it in, scope 3, your supply chain, both inbound and outbound. And that is really where the energy market's going. And we have seen some first movers on that, particularly in Europe, being able to prove that the thing they're selling is this carbon intensive compared to somebody else's thing. So therefore pay a premium to me for this, because when you sell your product, you can sell it for a premium as well, or get tax rebates or other components based on what the government regulations are providing. So yeah, it definitely has a play in those environments.
Thank you for that answer. I do appreciate it. Mark, what concerns are you hearing from clients on this?
Yeah, well, what we're hearing, and if I just zoom in on the technology side, we're getting quite a lot of questions from our clients around what the technology is going to consume as well. Like, should we get our own GPUs in our data centers? What's my footprint going to be if I run all of this on my cloud, and how is that going to impact me, not just on the costing side, but also from a sustainability perspective? We do help our clients with some of those decisions and going through that. But it is not a huge impact in what we're seeing, right? There's much larger impact with the topics that Vincent and Peter were talking about than what we're seeing on the technology side. And Andrew, I know you get these client questions as well. What's your thoughts?
I think you guys have covered all that really well. I think building an LLM is different than using an LLM in terms of consumption of energy. I think there's a big difference there. And I think people are conflating those two things. And the other thing in terms of how AI can support that, support ESG and sustainability overall, as Peter mentioned, like the basics of scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting and being able to see the breadth of your assets and pull that information together, and GenAI helping you with the stewardship of that is one thing. But after you get done the automation of the data integration for your scope 1, 2, and 3 reporting in an effective way, in an efficient way, then it's about transitional risk and physical risk. And then it's about modeling your assets for physical risk and transitional risk over 20, 50, 100 years. And what does that mean to, as Vincent mentioned, with the increase of the demands on the grid, with the distribution of the networks and right-sizing that, that's when AI can support that at scale, and that's when it's most effective supporting that.
Yeah, and I think AI's got a role to play in advancing sustainable practices as well, Andrew.
I think that. How do you exactly you're referring to that one, Derek? Before I start down a rabbit hole,
no, it's like what role can it play? I mean, that's the key part here.
once you've identified those challenges, it can be everything from managing the grid to your supply chain. So one of the things that we're talking about in terms of physical supply chain and truck rolls and optimizing those things, in terms of your scope 1 and scope 2, using quantum computing for optimizing your supply chain, whether it's inventory, whether it's truck rolls, whether it's supporting optimization of the asset itself, whether it's credit risk modeling or future demand modeling. That's how you can begin to ask yourself questions and game scenarios that you've never done before, right? We're working with one particular client right now, like all of us, moving parts around and moving trucks and people around for supply chains is an NP-hard type problem that's extremely difficult. And understanding how to use quantum computing and other things that are available to us today that we're actually using is critical, and behooves us to leverage what we can because of the constraints that we're under.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. I'd like to get at one use case here if we can, because we're running short on time. A lot of great questions from audience and a very spirited conversation here as well. Let's jump into grid management for a second. And Vincent, I'll come to you. How has AI technology improved grid reliability and outage management?
No, I think that how Peter's put it, like a little earlier, like AI really is kind of your assistant, like that really gives you hints of what could be happening, what are that basically ensures the preparedness of the grid operators as an incoming storm is approaching, as different weather events are showing their are showing their signs, right? So what we've seen globally, and Peter can comment on it, is utilities using that generative AI to assist grid operators to help them with generate outage recovery plans immediately after those weather events. We see also multiple AI use cases using digital triplets, like having a mapping of those infrastructure to anticipate and forecast the failures of those infrastructure and deploy the truck rolls just in time, not ahead of time. So we've really seen a decline in outages and outage times over time as induced by AI use cases.
Thanks, Vincent. Got another question from the audience. Mark, I'll come to you with this one. For predictive AI and asset failure prediction, additional data like relay logs and panel temperature, not typically part of telecontrol data, are needed. How can we enrich data sources with minimal disruption to live processes?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we've noticed that as well in several of our projects. And there's multiple ways of how our clients are doing that. So on the one side, you can see them buying quite cheap sensors and implementing that out in the field on their pump jacks or wherever, and ingesting that data set. But we are also looking at, and we have leveraged for a couple of clients, like using GenAI for actual data discovery. So where we typically would give, let's say, 100 columns to our asset failure prediction model, we can now do data discovery and we can give it thousands of columns of information. So that's another key way of looking at it. But again, trying to figure out the challenge, trying to figure out where this data is, leveraging GenAI to actually discover some of that data, and then throwing more data points at it is key to understand that more. And the other flip side, which I wanted to talk about, is data marts. So people are looking more into, let's say, well, can I overlay weather information on top of this? So let's go to a data mart and get some weather information. So it's not necessarily that the organizations have to collect all of that information themselves, but look at other organizations either through open data, data marts, or other areas in getting more data points so we can understand more and find more. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Gentlemen, anyone else want to add anything to that? I think it was pretty complete.
I could add a little bit to it. Other sources, I think, because machine vision and tools like that are there. The input of video sources, be these satellite weather images, drones, other cameras. We already see that happening for improving grid, monitoring outage, looking at distribution centers, other TSs and things to actually determine whether things are the way. And Mark talked about it earlier. Once you teach one of these systems what normal looks like, what they can do is start telling you when they see something that is abnormal. So an example I was talking to in a totally other industry was rail. You know, if a spike on the train is this high, it's okay. If it's that high, it's somewhat of a concern. If it's not there at all, that's a real concern. So you can start to teach things from a visual standpoint and mix in LiDAR, sonar, infrared, all these things that we as a human can't come in. Think of Star Trek, Geordi LaForge's visor, all that information coming in. You can do that now with AI and come up with conclusions you could never have had before that can be proactive to solve a problem before it becomes an issue.
Thank you, Peter, for completing that. I appreciate it. Time flies when you're having fun, they say. We're coming near the top of the clock. Like to move to our final block here. We call it activation and enablement. Andrew, I'll throw this question to you, and I'd love to hear from everyone as well. We'll start with you first. You know, what does an AI implementation roadmap to success look like for the ecosystem?
So there's two things. One is we always start with what financial lever are you pulling on? What's your actual problem? Are you trying to adjust SG&A? You're trying to address asset efficiency? You're trying to address, you know, customer support? Like, what financial lever are you pulling on? And then the second thing, and this is, nobody actually cares about AI. It's about, sorry to say that out loud, folks, but nobody actually cares. It's about returning the business value. And there's no one solution that's going to generate you, you know, tens and tens and tens of millions of dollars next month and solve the grid issues next month. Doesn't exist. So the real key to this that a lot of people are not paying enough attention to is your operating model. And how are you going to construct your teams so that you can have 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 different projects being delivered every 3 months in a staggered start. Some take longer, some are shorter. But how do you get that sort of repetitive improvement throughout your organization for multiple years? How do you, like, you know, there's an underinvestment in data engineering. Everybody thinks the AI is going to solve it for them. We need hundreds of data engineers for these problems to be able to solve these. And understanding how you create these teams with data engineering, ML ops, data science, etc., and create enough of them in a distributed way through your organization so that your operating model can deliver on whatever the initiatives are over the next 2, 3, 4 years is the most critical part of this, is the repeatability at scale. And we've underinvested in the data engineering needs traditionally in across Canada as well as in this industry.
Anyone else like to jump in? Mark, could I get a quick hit from you on that?
Yeah, no, fully aligned with what Andrew was just saying. The only other thing which I'm seeing from our clients is having, because it's blocking them at the moment, is having a good AI strategy and technology approach, because people are struggling with the whole buy versus build. Should I build this now, or should I just wait until one of my major, application companies is going to deliver it to me? So that whole kind of, should I wait or should I go and build it? That needs to be addressed, because it is stopping a lot of organizations, or it's holding them in this proof of concept world, and they're not able to get to that next stage because they never really thought it through or agreed it internally. So I would make sure kind of an AI strategy and a technology approach is key to make sure that implementation can run smoothly.
Thank you very much, Mark. Peter, I got to come to you with one more question. I'm going to ask you, I got to hold you to 60 seconds here as we're getting up to the clock.
Very quick.
What are the advantages of partnering with a technology company for guidance? I think it's important for some people to understand.
It's about resources, to Mark's point. There's not enough, and to Andrew's point, there's not enough resources, but it's also, I referenced rail industry. What can we learn from other industries? If you just look at the problems of way you've always done, you're not going to have some of the innovation. So it's looking wider. What can I learn from healthcare to solve a problem for utilities? What can I learn from manufacturing to solve a problem for utilities and distribution and things? is looking beyond the norm and looking for that wider viewpoint. Us, them, someone else. It's about getting that wider input of viewpoints.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you to all of you for sharing your insights today. Please do scan these on your screen momentarily for a deeper dive on today's discussion. And of course, anyone interested in contacting a member of our panel may do so via LinkedIn, or please visit us at cgi.com. On behalf of the entire CGI team, I'm Derek Marinos. Thank you so much for joining us. Be well.
Goodbye.